Okay, so they just made a new update. I wonder if it's a minor update or a big update. Okay. I thought my idea for my battery was pretty cool. Okay, so here's what we're going to be focusing on. It's going to be the hard part of this operation. It's going to be digging, and maybe just a little bit more digging. Oops. So we're just going to keep chiseling and chiseling out all this dirt that is in our way. We've been using this vehicle right here. So we're filling up here, but the only problem is that we're going to start running out of space to store stuff. So I might... Again, yeah, we need lithium and, like, zinc to make these batteries. I might just go with ammonium. Got 2 cans, we can probably use those for a bit. I'm reading. Oh my gosh. What is that? How many notifications? Question of Horrible Fates.
Enough timeline. The survival rate for everyone
Number 3.
to 0. Although I think we all hope that we'll meet our end peacefully, surrounded by our loved ones, the reality for many people is that this is simply not the case. I really can't emphasize it enough. Although the story descriptions in this video are true to the events as they occurred, they are still highly disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. In Michigan, in the city of South Lyon, west of Detroit, there is an industrial tube manufacturer known as the Michigan Seamless Tube Plant. In essence, they create various lengths and sizes of metal tubing and piping.
Alright, now this could be dangerous.
The materials arrive at the factory as cylindrical chunks that are then heated until they are white hot, at which point they are molded and hollowed out. The company also creates custom metal alloys and custom finishes on the metal for different industrial applications. Understandably, the factory has to use a variety of heavy machinery and harsh chemicals in the manufacturing process to create the final products. One such chemical they use in the manufacturing process is sulfuric acid.
Oh boy.
The combination of sulfur, oxygen, and hydrogen creates a colorless, odorless liquid that is highly corrosive to everything from rocks to metal. In everyday
And it looks like water.
Sulfuric acid is highly unusual, but in industrial manufacturing, the liquid is remarkably common and is used in several different processes from fertilizer to mineral processing. Unfortunately, its prevalence in manufacturing doesn't make it any less dangerous. If you get sulfuric acid on your skin, it will cause severe acidic chemical burns that are not unlike the burns you get from heat. And just like getting burned from heat, the chemical burns are extremely painful. It's destructive to all the tissues in your body and will dissolve your skin, your teeth, your eyes, and even your lungs, and you'll die if you get severe enough exposure.
Yeah.
On Saturday, February 9th,
Sulfuric acid, and not a really good thing to be contacting.
at the Michigan Seamless Tube Plant in South Lyon. He had worked for the company since April of 2017 and had just recently moved closer to the factory the previous July. According to neighbors of the Hill family, Daniel and the rest of his family were ecstatic to have moved to the countryside. By all accounts, they were nice, quiet people who were thoroughly enjoying their new area that was home to wildlife like deer and coyotes. Now, it's unclear exactly what transpired at the Michigan Tube Factory that day because details of the events are limited, but it seems as though the factory had a raised walkway of sorts above some large vats.
Oh shit, I think I might have heard about the story.
At some point during the day, some other workers at the plant noticed a man had fallen into one of the open vats and was at the side trying to pull himself out. They rushed over to him to try to pull him out, and they would manage to get him out, but not before getting burned from the piping hot liquid in the vat, because that's
hot and acidic. That's just not fun.
70 degrees Celsius. After pulling him out, they realized it was Daniel and rushed him over to one of the safety showers in the factory to wash off all of the chemicals. At this point, Daniel was still walking and talking, although probably in extreme pain from how hot the liquid was. Paramedics arrived at 12:21 p.m. and rushed him to Ann Arbor University Hospital and spent the next 11 hours providing him with medical attention, but unfortunately, Daniel would pass away later that day.
That is a shitty way to die.
That Daniel had fallen into a vat of 12% sulfuric acid solution and had burns over 100% of his entire body. So not only was the liquid extremely hot, it was extremely corrosive, ultimately contributing to his death. It's unclear exactly how Daniel fell into the vat or how long he was in the vat before anyone had noticed he had fallen in, but it seems as though he had fallen accidentally and was completely submerged during the initial fall. In an investigation of the incident, the Michigan Seamless Tube Plant received fines totaling $93,000 for several safety-related concerns, including zero training for at least 18 workers about hazardous energy sources. Orcas, or killer whales, despite their name, are actually members of the oceanic dolphin family and the largest member of this group.
Nothing kills. The only thing that kills orcas are other orcas and age.
Possess sophisticated hunting techniques due to their intelligence. They are also highly social and form stable family groups that pass unique vocalizations and behaviors across generations. Despite their status as apex predators, in the wild, they are not considered a threat to humans, and no fatal attack has ever been documented. In captivity, however, due to stress and boredom, orcas have been known to act aggressively towards themselves, their tank mates, and their handlers. In December of 1981, a male orca was born off the coast of Iceland and was captured 2 years later in 1983. A year after that, he was transferred to Sealand in the Pacific in Victoria, British Columbia.
Sealand, that's a whole controversial place.
Tilly would later grow to be the largest orca in captivity ever at 12,500 pounds and 22.5 feet long. His pectoral fin stretched 7 feet out on either side, and his fluke was 6.5 feet long, although it was collapsed as is typical of orcas in captivity. In his first years at Sealand, he lived in a tank with 2 older female orcas. As a result of their matriarchal social structure, Tilly was abused by the older female whales, who acted aggressively towards the young male. It got to the point that staff at Sealand had to remove him from the tank and keep him in a smaller medical pool for protection. On February 20th, 1991, part-time trainer and marine biology student Kelty Byrne was cleaning the area around the tank when she slipped and fell into the pool with the 3 whales. When she slipped, she managed to grab the edge of the pool, so only half of her body was submerged, but as she tried to pull herself out, one of the whales grabbed her and pulled her under the water. In the wild, orcas can travel up to 100 miles in a single day, all while hunting and socializing at the same time. No matter how big the tank, the environment of captive orcas just can't replicate the stimulation that they would receive in the wild. In addition, the objects that they do receive in their tank are typically toys that they're allowed to play with, and so to the 3 orcas, Kelty was just a new plaything. The other trainers saw what happened and ran over and threw food into the water to distract them, but the whales continued to grab Kelty. They then tried to throw a lifeguard ring to her, but the whales kept her away from the ring so she wasn't able to grab it. Despite being a competitive swimmer, Kelty was just no match for the orcas. Twice while this was going on, Kelty surfaced and screamed, but the whales continued to pull her back under the water.
That actually sucks.
The 3rd time, about 10 minutes
There's nothing you can do, because these are orcas, they're big.
Kelty had drowned. This was the first time that anyone had ever been recorded being killed by an orca, in the wild or otherwise. It would take another 2 hours to recover her body, and when they did, all of her clothes had been stripped off and she was covered in bites and bruises.
Damn.
Tilly was moved to SeaWorld in Orlando, Florida soon after this incident, and Sealand was closed in the year following the death of Kelty. Despite this tragic event, Tilly resumed performing once again after being transferred to SeaWorld, and would be without incident until 9 years later. On July 6, 1999, just after 7 a.m., a maintenance worker was cleaning around the breeding and research pool that Tilly was being held in and noticed a pair of legs draped over Tilly's back. The maintenance worker climbed upstairs to get a better look and would see that it was a man. He had no clothes, he was blue and discolored, and he had cuts and bruises covering his body. He was wearing swim trunks, they were torn open at the seam, and his genitals had been bitten off.
Holy shit.
As though he had been dead for a few hours because rigor mortis had already set in. Paramedics arrived at 7:30 a.m. and pronounced the man dead, who was later identified as David Duke from the wallet found in his clothing that was found neatly folded by the pool. It was discovered that David had visited SeaWorld the day prior and stayed in the park after dark once it had closed. He then snuck through the park and around security to get to where Tilly was being held. The shows at SeaWorld emphasized the human contact with the orcas, and it's thought that David was under the false assumption that he could just get to the pool with Tilly and recreate the experience he saw at the show. But unfortunately, this incorrect assumption would ultimately cost David his life. Once again, Tilly resumed performing shortly after the incident. Although the deaths were tragic, each occurred during extenuating circumstances that were otherwise out of the ordinary. And so the assumption was that Tilly would not continue to pose a threat to anyone. And this assumption was correct for the most part. Tilly performed for years afterwards without incident. By 2010, Tilly was performing in a show called Dine with Shamu with senior trainer Dawn Brancho. At the time, Dawn was SeaWorld's poster girl. After graduating from the University of South Carolina with a degree in psychology and animal behavior, Dawn continued to pursue her passion, which was working with animals. She started working with dolphins at Six Flags, New Jersey, and outside of work, she volunteered at a local animal shelter and kept a number of rescued animals at her home. In 1994, she transferred to SeaWorld, where she would go on to perform with the orcas. Dawn was eventually promoted to senior trainer and appeared on various news agencies like NBC to talk about the demands of the job and all the ways she stayed in shape to continue to perform at a high level. She would go into detail about the marathons and cycling and weightlifting that she did for training. All of her work paid off, and the famous Dine with Shamu show Tilly was the star attraction at SeaWorld. Dine with Shamu featured Tilly performing and eating in a pool while guests ate beside the pool watching the show at a poolside restaurant. On February 24th, 2010, during the end-of-show routine, Dawn was sitting at the edge of the pool rubbing Tilly's head. She was lying down on a small platform about a foot into the water, lying face-to-face with Tilly, when all of a sudden, Tilly grabbed her by the ponytail and pulled her under the water.
Oh.
At least a dozen people watched in horror as Tilly dragged Dawn around under the water and kept her submerged. Other trainers tried to use nets and food to distract Tilly, but nothing was working. For 45 minutes, they followed him around the different sections of the pool, trying to get him to release Dawn, and eventually they got him into a...
Yeah, man, I don't have a problem with zoos, but I don't think orcas need to be shut in captivity. It's way too much of an unknown variable.
Left elbow and knee, and removed her scalp from her head. An autopsy later confirmed that she had died due to drowning and blunt force trauma. In the aftermath of the event, SeaWorld was involved in a number of legal battles, but incredibly, Tilly would resume performing on March 30th, 2011. There were a number of new safety precautions put in place to minimize contact with him, and he would continue performing without incident until his death on January 6th, 2017. Controversy surrounding the incident, as well as allegations of animal cruelty from keeping highly intelligent animals in captivity like orcas, ultimately led to SeaWorld's decision in 2016 to end their breeding program. Eventually, their shows will be discontinued altogether when the last of the remaining captive orcas have died. On February 20th, 2003, in West Warwick, Rhode Island, a small concert took place at a local nightclub known as The Station. The headlining performance that night was the band Great White, and when all the other acts finished their sets, Great White got on stage and ready to perform. Someone in the audience was filming that night, and so there is a video of the entire event, but for those of you who are just listening, the video starts facing a dark stage and a crowd of people. You can hear people cheering as they waited for the band to start, and then the guitar comes in. Even more cheers can be heard, and then the pyrotechnics light up with the first big note of the guitar. In behind the band now are two jets of sparks, illuminating them from behind. Let's start.
Why would they use pyrotechnics in a building?
As he moves his way back and forth across the stage. 5 seconds went by, and then the camera pans to the right side of the stage, and you can see a large jet of flame going from the sparks to the ceiling. Upon panning over, the cameraman immediately starts to move away from the stage and through the crowd. There was now smoke visibly filling the room. 10 seconds later, the cameraman was at the edge of the large room and the band had stopped playing after noticing the fire. The large jet of sparks had ignited the highly flammable acoustic foam on either side of the stage. 20 seconds later, the lead singer can be heard saying, "Wow, that's not good," as the cameraman made his way down a hallway. The crowd could be heard audibly saying fire, and the slowly moving mass of people was starting to make its way towards
Crowd
the exit.
crush is gonna be really
The acoustic
bad.
foam was actually composed of 2 layers, one of urethane and one of polyurethane. Burning
Those are
polyurethane
your-
produces a thick black smoke that is composed of carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide gas.
Yuck.
Only a few inhales of the smoke will cause a loss of consciousness and death shortly after if the person continues to inhale the smoke. 30 seconds in, the fire alarm was going off and the stage was engulfed in an inferno. The whole crowd was panicking now and moving quickly towards the door. 1 minute in, the screams around the building started and the black smoke billowed out of the corridor leading to the exit. One woman can be heard screaming, "Where's my husband?" over and over in the panic. The cameraman made it out of the building and the audible screaming seems to be coming from the entire building at once. The cameraman then makes his way around the side of the building and every window of the building is billowing the thick black smoke. At 1 minute and 30 seconds, the cameraman walked around the building to the front entrance and sees a literal pile of people jammed in the doorway of the building. In the panic, most of the crowd had headed towards the front door. It seemed as though some people fell on the way out, and as the crowd continued forward, more people fell on top of them until the entire
Crowd
entrance was
crush.
blocked by a mass of bodies. All that could be seen was their heads, arms, and torso as they struggled to free themselves. At 2 minutes, the cameraman is panning around the front side of the building, and people can be seen pouring out of the window beside the front entrance as black smoke pours out from behind them. At 3 minutes 30 seconds, the cameraman starts to walk around the building again and sees another entrance into what looks like a hallway that is empty but completely engulfed in flame. He yelled into the hallway to see if anyone was nearby, but there was nothing but flames. He continued walking around the building, and as he did, the screams disappeared in the distance and all he heard was the crackle of the fire. At 4 minutes 30 seconds, the camera pans to the roof of the building and there are flames escaping through it. The cameraman then walked back around towards the front of the building and the screams became audible once again. Fire trucks could also be heard in the distance, rapidly approaching. At 6 minutes, the cameraman rounds the building once again and sees that the entrance of the building was now completely engulfed in flames. By 9 minutes, the entire building was an inferno. The video continues for a total of 13 minutes and eventually all of the screaming stops. Towards the end, the cameraman is filming the building from a distance as he walks through the parked cars in the parking lot. Of the 462 people in attendance that day, 100 people died, 230 were injured, and 132 escaped uninjured. The causes of death of the 100 people that died that day include...
Dude, less people die in an average tornado.
Ultimately, the speed at which the fire spread, poor visibility, and the volume of people all moving towards a single exit contributed to the tragic events that occurred that day. However, the main cause of the events that day were the pyrotechnics in a relatively small room with a low ceiling. In the aftermath of the events, the club owners claimed that they didn't give the band permission to use the sparkler jets, while the band claims that they were given permission. It was also discovered that the station nightclub did not have a sprinkler system, which would have slowed the spread of the fire significantly. Due to the old age of the building and its size, the station nightclub was thought to be exempt from the requirement. It's unclear exactly how it passed fire inspection without this being noticed, but this would be another contributor to the events on that fateful day. The 2 owners of the club and the band's manager who set up the pyrotechnics were charged with over 200 counts of involuntary manslaughter each and received sentences of varying lengths. Incredibly, the station nightclub fire is only the 4th deadliest nightclub fire in US history. If you made it this far, I just want to thank you for watching. This is part 3 of the series, a collection of horrible fates, so if you enjoyed this video, you may want to check out the other videos in the series. If you want to support the channel, give this video a like and drop a comment down below. If you're new here, welcome to Scary Interesting. If this is the type of content you enjoy, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully, I will see you in the next one.
Number 4. Horrible Fates number 4.
On the YouTube music app, you can bump your fave songs in the background. Well, you...
On a long enough timeline, the survival rate for everyone drops to 0. Welcome to another edition of a collection of horrible fates. Today's final story is going to cover a particularly horrifying incident where the victims were powerless to their circumstances. As always, viewer discretion is advised.
I can binge this shit all day.
In 2003, a man named Hitoshi was working as a surgical resident at Christus St. Joseph's Hospital in Dallas, Texas. Unlike many people who are simply clocking in and clocking out at the end of the day for a paycheck, Hitoshi was really passionate about his work as a doctor.
It's good
He'd been a
being
member
here.
of the 2003 class of the University of Texas Houston Medical School, where his classmates, also aspiring doctors, voted Hitoshi as the epitome of a good physician. It was during his time in medical school as well that Hitoshi had become a devout Christian and decided to become a missionary doctor. After he was finished his residency, his intention was to travel around the world as a doctor, working in impoverished areas. At 9:30 a.m. on August 16th, a colleague of Hitoshi's, Karen Steinau, was heading up to her office on the 6th floor. She pressed the button for the elevator and then waited patiently for it to arrive. In the past couple of weeks, the elevator had been out of service, and so there was always a long wait time to use just the single working elevator. The elevator dinged, the doors opened, and then Karen stepped inside and pressed the button for the 6th floor. At the last second, right before the doors closed, Hitoshi quickly stepped into the elevator, trying to catch a ride with his colleague. Under normal circumstances, elevator doors don't shut. There's something between them, thanks to sensors mounted on the inside of the doors. There's also a set of contacts in the door that are supposed to prevent the elevator from moving if the doors aren't shut. But the elevator that they were using was still supposed to be out of service. The sign that indicated that it was out of service, that had been there for the last couple of days, had fallen off, leading
That's a violation of OSHA standards. Yeah, I'm gonna nerd out here.
As Hitoshi entered the elevator.
So I do study OSHA and stuff. I'm actually certified 10-hour OSHA class, which isn't anything way too special. Just means I know the basics of OSHA. And one thing I do know is that when you do make a thing like that where an elevator is out of service, you need to have a sign that is not removed like that. And the fact that this sign was able to just fall off is pretty much a OSHA violation. Which again, if there were nothing happening in here, which I bet there's something gonna happen that's bad in this video. But if nothing happened, it won't be that much of a nuisance. But well, it's probably about to come back and bite these guys in the ass.
The door that were already closing closed on his shoulders, pinning him in place.
Uh-oh.
Then the elevator started going up with Hitoshi still wedged inside the
Oh,
doors.
shit.
Karen frantically reached and pressed the emergency button to stop it, but it was already too late. Hitoshi was partially decapitated by the ceiling of the next
Oh my
floor
God.
as the elevator continued to rise. The upper
Imagine
portion of his
seeing
head
that?
severed just above his lower
Traumatized
jaw,
for
stayed
life.
with Karen, and Hitoshi's body fell down into the elevator shaft all the way to the first floor. The elevator only finally stopped moving between the 4th and 5th floors, leaving Karen trapped with the top portion of Hitoshi's head.
And he's
until
just
almost an hour
she's
later.
just sitting there with it.
She was later treated in the hospital's emergency room for shock resulting from the incident. Hitoshi's corpse was retrieved from the bottom of the elevator shaft, along with a few of his belongings, and his official cause of death was multiple blunt force injuries to the head and body.
That's
It
gonna
was
be a
ultimately
bad
found that just a
OSHA
few faulty wires were
investigation.
responsible for the elevator malfunction, resulting in Hitoshi's tragic death.
Sucks again.
Is the fear of being buried alive, and although this is extremely
He wasn't doing anything that bad. He was just using the elevator, and then he just bites the dust.
Before the modern techniques used to check a person's vital signs, there were a number of cases where bodies were exhumed later and showed signs that the person tried to escape their coffin. This happened frequently enough that bells were installed in coffins.
True
so that
fact,
if a person
actually.
woke up, they could signal to people above ground that they were not, in fact, dead. One well-documented case of premature burial was a woman named Alice Blunden in 17th century England. Alice drank a large quantity of poppy tea from unwashed poppy seeds containing the opioids morphine and codeine. The amount that she consumed caused her to pass out, and then a doctor mistakenly pronounced her dead. Alice's family quickly made the arrangements for her burial, but then just 2 days later, kids playing near where she was buried heard strange noises coming from the ground. The noises they heard were the muffled screams of Alice asking for someone to rescue her. The frightened kids told their headmaster what they had heard, but instead of checking out the noises, the kids were disciplined for telling lies. The following day, the headmaster finally checked the grave out for himself and heard Alice's cries for help. For whatever reason, the grave couldn't be excavated without proper permission, and so it wasn't until late in the day when the coffin was finally opened. Alice's hands and arms were bloody from trying to escape her coffin, and because she just spent 2 days buried alive, she was actually now on the verge of death. Noticing this, her family returned her to her grave and had a guard stand watch overnight. That night, when it started raining, the guard left his post and went to the local pub instead.
As you do.
The next morning, the coffin was opened once more and found that Alice had woken up again and tore her clothes and scratched at her body and face. She did, however, pass away after the second time being buried alive.
That sucks.
That night. Alice Blunden made
buried alive twice.
Cases of someone buried alive, not once, but twice. And although modern medicine has eliminated the majority of live burial, every now and then, someone is still accidentally buried alive. In 2011, a woman in Kazan, Russia, collapsed at her home with chest pain. Suspecting a heart attack, she was rushed to the hospital, where she was unfortunately declared dead of a massive heart attack. Her family was devastated by the news of her passing and organized her funeral to be held 2 days later. Her funeral was open casket, and as the woman was lying in her coffin at her own funeral, she woke up to the sound of everyone crying and praying for her. When she realized what was going on, she started screaming and was immediately rushed back to the hospital. Unfortunately, she lived for only another 12 minutes in intensive care before she was pronounced dead once again. This time, she had suffered from complete heart failure due to the shock to her already weakened heart. On December 7th, 1941, Navy crewman John Anderson was stationed on the USS Arizona with his brother Hank. One of the cooks had his eyes glued.
I've seen these videos, but I may have forgotten a bit about them. Like, I know that what's horrifying, I want you to imagine this, right? Anyway, imagine this, right? You're on a ship, right? It gets bombed because of Pearl Harbor, and you bang against it in order to let people know you're there. But here's the problem. They can't really cut into your ship because there's oil all around the harbor, and it'll light up, and also that, and it'll flood and kill everybody inside. So basically, you're doomed.
The iconic red dot of the Japanese Imperial Army. The two of them looked at each other and knew what that meant. According to John, everyone had a feeling that an attack was imminent. They just weren't quite sure when it would happen. And this was the attack that they had all feared. He ran back to sound the alarm on the ship, but before he could, a bomb literally fell in front of him and blew him inside a nearby hatch. Now the entire ship was being strafed by machine guns from the sky, and bombs were falling all around them. All he could hear were the screams of his crewmates as they were torn up by the assaulting gunfire. John sprinted over to a turret and jumped into the seat, ready to fire back on the Japanese ships, but there were no ships in sight. It was all planes. The turret he was sitting in didn't have the mobility to fire up into the sky, and so he told the captain that he wouldn't be any use just sitting there. Instead, he asked if he could go and join the fight with his brother on the upper deck of the ship, where he would be more useful. The captain gave him permission, and so John quickly asked a few other crewmen if they would come up with him, so they all started climbing up a ladder through a trapdoor to the upper deck. When they reached the top of the ladder, there was a massive explosion, and the shockwave that came from it knocked everyone across the deck. John was knocked on his back by the shockwave, and when he stood up and looked around, there was a man who was laying there unconscious and on fire. So he grabbed the man and dragged him out of the fire and patted him down to put out the fire, ultimately saving the man's life. Small rescue boats started pulling up to the side of the ship to transport people to shore, and John was ordered to get into one of the boats, but he refused. His brother was still on the ship somewhere, and there was no way he was leaving without finding out if he was still alive. Deep down, though, it's likely that John knew that the giant explosion a few moments ago had killed his brother, and the USS Arizona was sinking rapidly now, and any minute it would be fully submerged in the Pacific Ocean. John still refused the orders, explaining to the officers that he wasn't going anywhere without his brother. Then another bomb exploded on the turret that John had been sitting in just a second ago. The explosion sent it sliding off the side of the deck and down into the Combat Information Center, where it also exploded, killing a bunch of the officers inside. The lieutenant grabbed John and pushed him in the boat, and before John could react, the boat was already moving away from the ship and toward the shore. John cried out that he didn't want to leave, but there was just nothing he could do. But after getting to the shore and dropping off some of the wounded soldiers, John would actually convince the others to let him take the boat back to the Arizona. When he got back to the Arizona, he did manage to rescue 3 more crewmen who were right near the edge of the ship, but it was clear that anyone else who had still been on the ship could no longer be reached. Between the fire and the explosions, it was just impossible to get onto the boat and look for anyone else. John left the ship once again, knowing that his brother had almost certainly already died. Meanwhile, all of the bombing and machine gun fire was still going on all around them. On the way back to shore, a shell hit their boat and exploded, killing everyone but John. After all of the trouble of navigating through the machine gun fire and getting back to the Arizona, the mission ended up being in vain anyway. John was thrown into the water that was now coated with flaming oil leaking from the ships, so he had to swim as far as he could underwater, trying to surface outside of the radius of the oil. He would eventually make it back to shore, trying to look for survivors as he went, and when he got back to shore, he was so exhausted from swimming, he just collapsed onto the sand. He looked up into the sky, and there were so many Japanese planes still, he assumed that a new wave had been sent. As they got closer and closer to his position, he had no choice but to get up and run for cover. He took off running, and luckily managed to find a rifle and some ammunition, and then took cover in a crater that had been made by one of the Japanese bombs. As he waited in the crater, another survivor happened to go by, and the two of them took shelter there for the night. The following morning, search and rescue operations happened to pass by the crater where John and the other survivor had taken shelter. The two men joined the group and were eventually sent to a nearby base on Ford Island, where they were greeted by 200 other members of the Arizona crew who had survived the attack. The attack that John and the others had just lived through is known infamously as the attack on Pearl Harbor. This attack by the Japanese Imperial Navy was actually a surprise attack on the still neutral United States during World War II.
Yeah, they kicked the frickin' ball with that one.
Aircraft were launched from 6 aircraft carriers stationed in the Pacific Ocean near the island of Hawaii with the goal of crippling the United States Pacific Fleet. Over the course of 7 hours, there was a series of coordinated attacks on the Philippines, Guam, Singapore, and Hong Kong. In the attack, more than 180 U.S. aircraft were destroyed, over 2,000 people were killed, and a further 1,000 were wounded. A number of important military bases were destroyed. All of the Navy battleships stationed in the harbor were damaged, and 4 of them were damaged badly enough that they actually sank. One of the ships that sank was known as the USS West Virginia. As with the Arizona, just before 8 a.m., a hail of torpedoes and armor-piercing shells rained down on the hull of the ship. Due to the prompt damage control by its crew, the West Virginia sank slowly, giving most of the crew enough time to evacuate, finally coming to a rest, half submerged at the bottom of the harbor. At some point, fuel leaking from the nearby Arizona caught fire and engulfed the West Virginia as it sank. After the fires were finally extinguished, 103 men from the West Virginia were found to have been killed in the attack. During the rescue efforts the following day, the harbor was almost as noisy as it had been the day prior, between the sound of fireboats spraying the Arizona and the hammers against the overturned USS Oklahoma. There was also a rhythmic banging sound coming from the West Virginia that everyone assumed was just a piece of loose rigging that was slapping against the hull in the waves. The following morning at dawn, when everything was quiet, the rhythmic banging was still there. Everyone soon came to the horrifying realization that the banging was coming from men still trapped deep in the hull of the West Virginia. At some point during the attack, as the West Virginia sank, 3 men got stuck in an airtight storeroom. With the ship firmly stuck in the mud at the bottom of the harbor, they had very few options to rescue the trapped men. Over the course of several days, rescue teams continued to hear the rhythmic banging as they figured out what to do. Marines stationed on the docks near the boat covered their ears. The horror of the banging was just too awful, knowing the circumstances of the trapped men. Eventually, the rescuers also came to the realization that there was no way to save the trapped men. They couldn't cut a hole into the room or would flood the room and drown the men. They also couldn't use any torches because the entire boat was covered in a slick, oily layer from all of the fuel.
Yeah, they're basically cooked.
And the banging could still be heard. Then at around 2 weeks, the banging stopped and the hull was silent. 6 months later, the West Virginia was finally raised from the water and the bodies of the 3 men were recovered. They were identified as 18-year-old Ronald Endicott, 20-year-old Clifford Olds, and 21-year-old Lewis Costin. Tragically, the men had created a
guy was literally just an adult
to mark the days they lived. It would take a total of 16 days, marked by the red pencil found in the room, for the men to finally die of dehydration after their rations ran out. Truly a horrifying ordeal. If you made it this far, I just want to thank you for watching. This is part 4 of the series, A Collection of Horrible Fates, so if you enjoyed this video, you may want to check out the other videos in the series. If you want to support the channel, give this video a like and drop a comment down below. If you're new here, welcome to Scary Interesting. If this is the type of content you enjoy, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of my uploads. Once again,
it's number 6, maybe the 5th one got removed.
Forget everything you knew about.
Okay, I need it. I might actually go get some goldfish, because I haven't eaten those in a while. Actually, I have been eating a little bit in the past few days.
action game War Thunder will bring you a story.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Scary Interesting. So here's what I'm thinking for this series going forward. I think that limiting it only to occurrences that end in the loss of life is a bit too constraining. And I think we can all agree that there are some circumstances that certainly fit the description of a horrible fate, even if they don't end in death. So, going forward, the stories that you'll hear in this series might feature someone's tragic end, or they might feature some other horrible circumstance, and you'll never quite know what to expect. This way, it'll include a broader range of topics, and hopefully, the ending will always be a surprise. With all of that said, as always, viewer discretion is advised. In the northeast section of Maryland is a small town known as Betterton, with a population of only 345 people. Betterton is a small coastal town that sits at the mouth of the Sassafras River and occupies an area of only a single square mile. Because it's such a small town, the town government consists of a single mayor and 4 council members. These individuals meet every second and fourth Tuesday of every month to discuss all things related to Betterton. In 1980, the town mayor was a woman named Monica Meyer. At 70 years old, Monica didn't have much else to do, and so she spent her time doing odd jobs around the town to help maintain it. One of these tasks that she regularly performed was testing and cleaning the water at the town's municipal facility. The job involved brushing the tanks and testing the water for chlorine and other sediments to make sure that the water was safe for the town's people. Almost every day, she'd drive up to the facility.
Oh, you got a beardy! My sister's got a beardy. Nice. Oh yeah, we actually have had 2. The first one passed away. His name was Toothless, reference to Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon. The second is named Atticus, which is a reference to not the book. I know what the book's called. I just need to figure it out. I literally read the book. I don't know. It's a very famous book. 2 beardies. What I can't take is the stereotype. Oh, look at the beardy. He's getting happy. No, it's not. It's getting pissed. Especially when the beard goes black. That means they're really pissed. Okay, you know what? We need another tank. I'm not gonna hide the fact that we actually need another tank. Whatever. I have a little bit of nanocarbon. Yeah, you definitely know, but a lot of people that don't know about beard dragons don't. Yeah. Like they have a third eye on the top of their head. It doesn't see, it only just detects light.
For equipment, clean and test, brushing the tanks and testing the water for chlorine and other sediments to make sure that the water was safe for the town's people.
Alright.
Almost every day, she'd drive up to the facility, bring in all of her equipment, clean and test the tanks, and then leave for the day. Early one Thursday morning, town engineer Carl Gustafson arrived at the facility where he worked part-time, overseeing its operation. Was where she left when she was going about her cleaning. He climbed up the catwalk to where Monica normally went, thinking that she had gotten there early, but when he got to the top, he looked down and was horrified to see Monica's body floating face down in one of the 15-foot deep aeration tanks. It was clear that Monica...
Yup. She died in an aeration tank. I'm not surprised. Huh, that's actually really cool. I love the babies. They're like that big. They're so cute. Yeah. Let me explain what I just said. Aeration tank is scary. You don't swim in an aeration tank. You will sink. Don't ever try to, go in one. The thing is, here's how it works. So, in waste, 3. Nice. Here's how it works. When you have sewage, it needs to be broken down. A good way to break down in sewage, nice, is to use bacteria. These bacteria need oxygen to live, so therefore we have tanks that aerate the water, basically make it have bubbles. The problem is with all that water in this, or all that air in that water, it makes the water almost borderline unswimmable. So you literally just sink. Oh.
Yeah. And to make things even worse, the tank that she was in was filled with raw sewage. The liquid that she had fallen into was described as having the consistency of putty or quicksand.
Yeah.
If you fall into it, not only is it insanely disgusting, you have essentially no chance of getting out on your own. Police were brought in to investigate, but they quickly ruled out foul play. It seems as though, unfortunately, Monica simply slipped as she was going about her normal cleaning and fell into the sewage tank below, where she ultimately drowned. How hard is it? Crazy hard. No miss scoops.
If she was doing that by herself, she should have had a buddy system.
In the spring of 2012, everything was going perfectly for a woman named Amy. She had just finished writing her last exams for that school year, where she was studying to get a master's degree in psychology. She was in a relationship, and she had a job as a barista that was close to where she lived in Carrollton.
Oh, thank you, ma'am.
It seemed as though everything was going right in her life. On top of all of that, she had big and exciting plans to make the most of summer break. On the afternoon of...
Also, you should hit a sub up to a guy named Scary Interesting. That's who I'm watching right now. He's pretty good. We're kind of stuck at a standstill because I have to drain those soil tanks. I might quit stream and go to another stream. Because my buddy. Alright. Bruh. Me? Probably like 2017, 2018 for me. I have 1,300 Robux. I forgot about that. I got like a $20 pack, but I'll save that $20. I'll keep rationing that Robux over like 1 or 2 years. Nice.
First, a co-worker from the cafe she worked at invited her over to hang out
Alright.
after work.
No, don't be sorry. I respect your time.
It was so nice outside.
Yeah, that's why I'm not one of those Hebrews that's like, oh, don't go. No, you got a life. I'm not gonna intrude on that life. I don't have a right to do it. Oh, look, empty tanks. Do we have argon? We do. We do.
Go swimming in it. After work, Amy headed over, and then the two of them changed into their swimsuits and walked into the backyard into the gorgeous sunny weather. The creek was nice and warm, and after swimming for a bit, they noticed a homemade zip line that was strung up just a little ways away from where her coworker's backyard was. It was about 6 feet high up and extended for another 6 feet over the water, so they could zip across and jump into the water at the end. As an adventurous 22-year-old, Amy obviously wanted to try it, so they walked over to where the handlebars were at one end of the zip line. Then they each took turns flying across the zip line and jumping into the water. On Amy's second turn, she grabbed onto the handlebars just like she had done the last time. She lifted her feet and started to go across when all of a sudden there was a loud snap. The zip line broke and she fell short of the deep section of the water and onto some rocks down below.
Oh.
As she landed, her leg was sliced open by one of the rocks. It was bad enough that they knew right away that she needed to go get stitches. So they got her in the car and headed off to the hospital. At the hospital, she had to get 22 staples to close the wound. She got some antibiotics to prevent it from getting infected, and then she was sent home that same day. And although the cut was pretty bad, Amy
shoot, I got steel right here.
A few days until it healed up a little bit, and then the worst of it would be over. But already just a few days later, Amy could tell something wasn't right. The wound didn't seem to be healing at all. Despite using the antibiotics, the cut seemed to be staying exactly the same, or even getting worse. The pain that should have subsided after a few days seemed to be getting worse as well, and even felt like it was moving around her body, causing pain in different areas. On the third day,
There's something inside of her leg.
Amy woke up to find that her leg looked like it was literally rotting. It had blood blisters all over it. Her tongue was
sounds like something like a bot fly.
Making it hard to talk, and she felt like she was dying. Upon seeing this, her boyfriend immediately picked her up, threw her over.
Oh hell yeah! There's something inside of her.
To go to the hospital.
Not in that weird sense.
Onward, everything was a bit of a blur.
She's probably got like a bot fly.
Doctors knew right away what was happening. Amy contracted a bacteria known as Aeromonas hydrophila. Normally, if you accidentally swallow this bacteria while swimming, it can cause diarrhea, but in rare cases, if it enters an open wound, it can cause something called necrotizing fasciitis. This condition is more commonly known as flesh-eating bacteria. If it's treated early enough, the infected person might only need some skin removed, but in the case that's not caught early, the symptoms can be much, much worse. At the hospital, Amy was given more antibiotics, but doctors could already tell that her leg wasn't responding to the treatment. She was airlifted to a hospital in Augusta, where the doctors informed her parents that if they didn't start more aggressive treatment, Amy would die. The infection had already spread to her organs, causing them to start to fail, and so they asked her parents permission to amputate her infected leg and part of her abdomen to slow the spread. All the while, Amy was drifting in and out of consciousness. In the course of just a few days, the infection had become so bad that Amy had a heart attack while being moved from bed to bed. She was put on a respirator to breathe for her and was on full-time dialysis. Even after removing her leg, a doctor informed her parents that
actual life hacks. Don't ever swim in still water. That looks like it's been sitting there for ages. It's got this, it can't actually carry this organism inside.
She was so delirious that her parents had to re-explain her situation to her, and every time she reacted like it was her first time hearing it. It was horribly traumatizing to hear that she'd lost her leg and was close to dying over and over again. Even worse, one morning she woke up to her dad sitting at her bedside and holding up her hands. Her dad lifted up her hands to show her them, and she saw that they were dark purple and black and looked dead. Amy had been put on a type of medication that constricts the blood vessels to help keep her blood pressure high and in her organs. Unfortunately, this constricts blood flow to the extremities, causing her hands and her other foot to be starved of blood. As she fought to stay alive, her other limbs had slowly died. Now that they were dead, they were also at risk of becoming infected, further reducing the chances of her recovery. Amy's dad had to explain to her that her best chance of survival was to have the rest of her limbs removed as well. Even in her delirious state, Amy was devastated to hear that. But at the same time, in that moment, she desperately wanted to live. She knew that if her hands were holding her back, she needed them gone too, so she told her dad that the doctors could go ahead, and then she was taken into surgery, where her hands and her other foot were amputated as well.
Honestly, it sucks, but I'd rather lose my foot and my hands than my life.
She was on. After the doses were slowly reduced, it started to set in that her life had changed forever. Amy had lost all 4 of her limbs in just a few short weeks from one highly unlikely incident. During her recovery, she was at the lowest point in her entire life. She had to relearn how to feed herself, how to brush her teeth, how to get dressed, and she was no longer able to walk because the leg that had to be amputated first had to be cut off high up near her hip. Her self-esteem was destroyed, she battled depression, and as she slowly tapered off the painkillers, she battled withdrawal symptoms as well. But things would steadily improve. Amy was determined not to be beaten by her circumstances. Slowly, she returned to normal life. She was fitted with a prosthetic that allowed her to walk. She went back and finished her master's degree, and she even started a non-profit for other individuals with disabilities like hers. Eventually, Amy would go on to work at the rehab clinic she was in during her recovery. And since the incident, Amy has even said that she's the happiest she's ever been. And
at least she's happy, right?
Do it all. Song down. Get you to music.
Angela Hammond was born in Kansas City, Missouri on February 9th, 1971. After she was born, her parents decided to move to the small town of Clinton, Missouri to be closer to Angela's mom's parents. After having a son, the family would live in Clinton for the entirety of their childhoods. Growing up, Angela was considered to be smart and witty by the people who knew her, and generally very likable. This led her to be quite popular all throughout school. She was also a very driven individual, and along with being really likable, everyone had a feeling that she was destined to do great things. At 19 years old, a year after she left high school, she started dating 18-year-old Rob Schaefer. Rob was in his final year at the high school that they both attended, and the two of them seemed like a perfect match. Not only was Rob a football star at their high school, he was smart and funny and likable, just like Angela. The two of them got along incredibly well, and so when Angela got pregnant in 1991, Rob proposed almost immediately. Angela accepted his proposal, and then from that moment onward, their life revolved around getting established and getting ready for their new baby. Rob intended on joining the military and worked odd jobs until then, and Angela attended Central Missouri State University and worked at a bank processor in the evening. The two of them also rented a house together and worked hard to save what little money they made. On April 4th, 1991, the couple went to a barbecue at Angela's mom's house. Her parents were now divorced, but thankfully the divorce had been amicable. Then at 9 p.m., after spending a few hours at the barbecue, Rob had to leave to go babysit his younger brother at his parents' house. After Rob left, Angela picked up her best friend, and the two of them drove around and hung out for a couple of hours. Just after 11 p.m., Angela dropped her friend off and then went to a payphone to give Rob a call. At the time, the couple didn't have a home phone, and so the payphone was her only option to get a hold of him. Angela had initially told Rob that she would come over to her parents' house after hanging out with her friend, but now she was super tired and just wanted to head home and get some sleep. She gave him a call and let him know, and then the two of them talked for a little bit. While they were on the phone, a green Ford pickup pulled into the parking lot and started making circles around the area. Angela told Rob about it and described the truck, but as she was telling him, the pickup pulled out of the parking lot and out of view. They both thought that it was kind of odd, and then as they were talking about it, the pickup pulled back into the parking lot and parked in a parking space. A man then got out of the pickup and walked to the phone booth next to her. She told Rob that he had come over, but again, this is 1991, so payphones were much more commonly used, so it wasn't really anything out of the ordinary just yet. Another second later, the man left the phone booth and went back to his truck where he took out a flashlight and started rummaging around as if he was looking for something. At this point, Angela started to get a bit nervous because the guy's behavior was just kind of off. She told Rob about what he was doing, and Rob suggested that maybe the phone the guy had tried to use wasn't working, and maybe he was waiting to use the one that she was using instead. Angela thought that sounded reasonable, and so she leaned out of the booth and asked the man if he needed to use the phone. The man quickly said no, and then Rob started feeling uneasy about the whole situation as well. Angela started to describe the man to Rob as a white man who was wearing overalls, a baseball hat, he had a beard, and he was really dirty looking. But midway through her sentence, she let out a blood-curdling scream. On the other end, Rob heard a man say, "I didn't need to use the phone anyway," and then the line went dead. Rob dropped the phone and sprinted out of the house to his car. He immediately hopped in and sped over to the payphone that was just a few minutes away from his parents' house. On the way, he saw a truck approaching from the opposite direction that matched the description that Angela had given him. He looked into the truck as it passed and saw a man driving, with a woman in the passenger seat screaming. Rob instantly recognized it as Angela, and so he slammed the car into reverse and then turned around to chase after it. He managed to get 2 miles before his car died, and he watched as the green pickup disappeared into the distance. When he had shifted into reverse so quickly, he had damaged the transmission. By the time he had gotten close to the truck, the transmission died, leaving him to watch in horror as it sped away. He quickly got out of his car and chased after the truck, but within a few moments, he realized it was hopeless. Instead, he ran back into town and flagged down the first car he saw and then had them bring him directly to the police station. This small-town police station didn't regularly have major occurrences. They weren't quite sure what to make of the situation at first, but they launched an investigation anyway. They had Rob describe the man.
Watching your loved one
based on his description.
in a kidnapped car speed away from you, you're powerless to do anything about it.
The police claimed that they thought it was possible he was wearing a fake beard. Rob also described the truck the man was driving as a green 1960s or 1970s Ford pickup with a decal of a fish jumping out of the water on the back window. Unfortunately, the license plate was too rusted out to identify anything other than an X and a Y, giving the police very little to go off of. With so little evidence and an unusual story, police started looking at Rob as a suspect. He was given a polygraph test and passed, but police still found his story to be too unbelievable. They went to interview each of Angela's parents next, and each of them insisted that Rob adored her. Neither of them thought Rob had anything to do with her disappearance. His car was also found in the exact spot that he claimed it had broken down, and Angela's car was found in the parking lot where the payphone was, with her purse still inside. In addition, witnesses started to come forward, claiming to have seen a truck match the description, with a woman screaming inside. Following these discoveries, Rob was cleared of any involvement, but in the meantime, he was frantic and desperate, looking for not only the love of his life, but the woman carrying his child. Angela's disappearance was devastating for Clinton. It seemed like the whole town was out and helping look for her, searching for any evidence and hanging flyers around town. Rumors quickly started to pop up about Angela's ex-boyfriend being somehow involved, and also claiming that the baby wasn't Rob's. But both Rob and her ex-boyfriend would deny this, and another polygraph would rule it out as well. Then, after local police came up with essentially nothing, the state police and the FBI got involved in the search. First, they tried to locate trucks similar to the one that took Angela, but over 1,500 trucks showed up as a potential match. Other police jurisdictions even got involved to help locate any leads, but every effort just ended in a dead end. Police even looked at 2 other disappearances in the area to see if there was any connection to Angela's case. First was a woman named Trudy, who had vanished from a convenience store in Max Creek. Then in February, another woman named Cheryl vanished from a gas station and was never found. Despite the similarities in these cases, Trudy's body would eventually be found, and 2 individuals were convicted for her murder, but they were not connected to Angela's disappearance. The second disappearance offered no additional clues either, because the woman was simply never found. After that, the case went cold. Occasionally, another vague lead would pop up, but they all ended in nothing, and it would remain that way for decades until 30 years later. On the 30th anniversary of Angela's disappearance, investigators released new details about a possible theory for Angela's abduction. Around the same time that she had been abducted, a man had been acting as an informant in a narcotics case, and he received a note threatening his daughter's life. His daughter's name also happened to be Angela, and she looked strikingly similar to Angela Hammond. And the note he received was on April 4th, the same night Angela was abducted. As of April 2021, that lead is still being investigated, and so that leaves a few possibilities for her disappearance. First, there were 2 active serial killers in Missouri at the time. They both targeted young women, but they have since been executed for their crimes, so there's no evidence linking them to her disappearance. Second, it could simply have been a random attack. Someone could have seen a woman alone in a phone booth and decided to attack her. And finally, it could be a case of mistaken identity. Angela could have been mistaken for another woman matching her description, but so far, nothing has come of it, and Angela has been missing ever since. If you made it this far, I just want to thank you for watching.
Here's the scary
My name is
thing.
Sean, and welcome
When
to
they're
Strange
missing
Things.
for that long,
This is
can you imagine what
part 6 of a
has been
series
done to
of collection
them
of horrible
in that
things. So if you
time?
enjoyed this
Remember, I'm not
video,
gonna
check out the other
get into really any
series.
gross details, but
If
you
enjoyed
kind
this
of get
video
what
as
I'm
well,
picking
I'd
up,
really
like
appreciate it if you
what
would
they
like.
could have
That
done.
helps out with the YouTube algorithm.
They may
And
not even be
subscribe if you
alive.
aren't already, so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. Once again, thank you so much for
Be back, guys. I'm gonna call my friend. I'm gonna end stream. I'm gonna go play with my friend.